Welcome to this video on transactions, one of a series of videos on transactional analysis concepts. This video assumes knowledge of the first order structural model. If you are not familiar with this key concept in TA, please take a look at our video on that subject. Familiarity with the second order functional model is similarly useful. In transactional analysis, an instance of communication is known as a transaction. Transactions are made of a stimulus, which occurs when a person initiates communication from one of their ego states, and a response, when the person they were addressing responds from one of their ego states. The standard way people communicate is in a series of linked transactions known as a chain of transactions. Transactions may be analysed by the ego state model of the personality. This is called transactional analysis proper to distinguish it from the wider therapeutic approach. When analysing in this way, we can use the first order structural model ego states, parent, adult and child, or, if we wish to be more precise, we can use the ego state subdivisions from the second order functional model, which contains positive and negative versions of controlling parent, nurturing parent, adapted child, and free child. Whichever model we use to analyse transactions, it is conventional to use the visual representation of the first order structural model in diagrams detailing transactional analysis proper, though if desired, any ego state subdivisions of the second order functional model being used can be noted. Further, in TA proper diagrams, the person initiating the communication is shown on the left side and the person responding on the right. Each stimulus or response may be further broken down into two parts: an open social message, in diagrams indicated by an arrow with an unbroken line, and a hidden psychological message, indicated by an arrow with a dotted line. The social message represents the most obvious parts of what is being communicated, often the words being spoken. The psychological message, on the other hand, represents the less obvious parts, usually the person's body language, tone of voice, and other non-verbal cues. Sometimes, the social and psychological messages originate from the same ego state and go to the same ego state. There is no hidden message and the person means what they say. When this is the case, in diagrams, the dotted line is not shown. At other times, the social and psychological messages do not originate from the same ego state and or go to the same ego state. There is a hidden message, and the person means something other than, or additional to, what they say. Complementary transactions are transactions in which the stimulus and response are parallel to each other. This gives them their alternative name of parallel transactions. The ego state addressed is the one that responds, and it does so to the ego state that initiated the transaction. No psychological messages are represented here because, since in complementary transactions the psychological messages are in perfect alignment with their corresponding social messages, there is effectively no hidden communication. Common complementary transactions include adult to adult, parent to child, and child to parent. Less common but still significant ones are parent to parent and child to child. To give an example of an adult to adult complementary transaction, Claire, a company manager, is speaking to a staff member. As she asks, "Have you finished that piece of work?" her body language is open and attentive and her tone of voice friendly and inquiring. She is initiating a transaction from her adult ego state and is inviting a response from her staff member's adult ego state. If, in responding, the staff member says, "No, but I'll have it done tomorrow," in a positive, open and calm way, with a steady, pleasant tone of voice, we could say that she is responding from her adult ego state to Claire's adult. With both stimulus and response coming from adult and going to adult, this is clearly a complementary transaction. To illustrate a parent-to-child complementary transaction, we can go back to when Claire says, "Have you finished that piece of work?" this time imagining that instead her voice is soft and kind, her body language comforting, and she is giving an understanding smile. She is addressing her staff member's child ego state from her parent ego state, specifically her positive nurturing parent. If, when the employee replies, she blushes, smiles and says in a submissive voice, "No, but I could really use some help. I don't think I can do it on my own." We can see that she is in her child ego state, most likely her positive adapted child, as she is trying to follow the rules in a way that benefits her, and she is addressing Claire's parent ego state. A child-to-parent complementary transaction initiated by Claire could occur when communicating with an authority figure. Due to the internal content of her ego states, as defined by the second-order structural model, she has always had trouble dealing with them. At her workplace, Claire must ask a superior, known for his lack of patience with underperforming employees, for more support for her department. As she says, "Could you hire some more staff? We're really struggling." Her nervous, fidgety manner and lack of eye contact with her superior suggest she is in her child ego state, specifically negative adapted child. She is attempting to follow the rules, but doing so in a way that will harm her given her superior's usual attitude to such requests, and is addressing his parent ego state. His reply of course not, don't be so silly, just get on with it," along with his harsh tone of voice and domineering body language, show that he is replying from his parent ego state, more precisely negative controlling parent. He is enforcing his will without positive regard for Claire, to Claire's child ego state. A parent-to-parent complementary transaction, on the other hand, is more equal, and often involves a swapping of parental observations about others. An example is when Claire meets another manager after work for a coffee. As they talk, they bemoan the calibre of the new staff members they manage. After Claire says, "The new lot are even worse than usual, it's not worth asking them to do anything," her friend replies, "I know, these days they haven't got the skills." Their dismissive tone and body language as they speak, yet their friendliness to each other, suggests they are both in their parent ego state, more precisely negative controlling parent, and are addressing the other's parent ego state. Given the ease and familiarity of this conversation, they could carry on in this way for quite some time. Carrying on the example of Claire and her friend meeting after work, as they relax they forget about their underperforming staff and decide to treat themselves to a nice meal. As they select dishes, their body language shows that they are enjoying themselves. When Claire says, "I'm going to have that chicken I like and a glass of wine," her friend responds by saying, "Great idea, I'll have a glass of wine too." Their simple enjoyment, without consideration of rules or consequences, show that they are both in their child ego state, specifically positive free child, making this a child-to-child complementary transaction. Since there is a familiarity to the relationships detailed, complementary transactions can feel very comfortable. As a result of this, they are inherently stable. This gives rise to the first rule of communication. So long as transactions remain complementary, communication can exist indefinitely. This means that a chain of complementary transactions can continue for a long time, effectively, until something external to the chain acts to end it. Cross-transactions are transactions in which the stimulus and response are not parallel. The ego state addressed is not the ego state that responds. Again, no psychological messages are represented because there are no hidden messages coming from either the initiator of the communication or the responder. Each person means what they say. There are many different types of cross-transaction. For an example of a cross-transaction, we can return to Claire's conversation with her staff member regarding unfinished work. When Claire asks from her adult ego state, "Have you finished that piece of work?" she is addressing her subordinate's adult ego state. If a staff member replies, "Can't believe you've asked me again, you're always picking on me, it's not fair," while crossing her arms, frowning, and speaking in a petulant tone of voice, it is likely that she is replying from her child ego state, in this case negative adapted child, due to the fact that she is reacting to rules in a way likely to cause her harm, and is addressing Claire's parent ego state. This cross-transaction is clearly difficult for both of them. Claire is irritated not to receive a response from adult, while her staff member is, perhaps, feeling pressured by Claire's adult stance. Because cross-transactions are by nature uncomfortable, they are inherently unstable. Communications made of chains of cross-transactions rarely last very long. Participants feel the need to escape from them and engage in more stable and familiar complementary transactions. This gives rise to the second rule of communication. When a transaction is crossed, a break in communication results, and one or both individuals will need to shift ego states in order for communication to be re-established. Ulterior transactions differ from complementary and cross transactions. In them, the social messages given by participants are not necessarily the same as the psychological messages. What the participants say may not be the same as what they mean. Because of this difference, in diagrams of ulterior transactions, psychological messages are shown where appropriate. There are a number of different types of ulterior transaction, but the two most common are duplex transactions and angular transactions. Ulterior transactions are often a component of games, a part of transactional analysis detailed in another video. Duplex transactions are ulterior transactions in which the social messages are from adult to adult, but the hidden psychological messages are from parent to child, from child to parent, or less often from parent to parent or from child to child. An analysis of the words spoken would indicate a grown-up, rational conversation in the here and now, but the participant's body language, facial expressions, tones of voice, and other nonverbal cues indicate something entirely different is going on. Whatever that is, it is often rooted in the context of the transaction and the history behind it, including the previous relationship between the participants. As an example of a duplex transaction with a parent-to-child psychological message, Claire is talking to the manager of another department. She initiates the transaction by saying, "Both our departments need to work hard on this." He responds, saying, "Yes, that's right." This appears to be a rational exchange of views in which both parties are in their adult ego state. However, an analysis of nonverbal cues reveals something different. Claire's body language is confrontational, her voice is flat and hard, and she is staring directly at her colleague. Her psychological message is, "Your department never pulls its weight. You'd better start or there'll be trouble." She is very likely a negative controlling parent, as she is displaying commanding behaviour without regard to the welfare of her staff member. He, on the other hand, is hunched and not looking directly at Claire. Further, his voice is low and he is mumbling his response. His psychological message is, "I'm scared of you, so I'm saying what you want to hear. Please leave me alone." This indicates he is likely to be a negative adapted child, as he is responding to rules in a way detrimental to his long-term benefit. An example of a duplex transaction with a child-to-parent psychological message is when Claire must give a report she has prepared to a superior. This superior has a say in whether she will be next in line for promotion. Claire says, "Here's that report you asked for," and the manager responds, "Thanks, I'll take a look at it." Based on their words, each participant is apparently in their adult ego state. Claire's demeanour, however, is positive yet submissive. She smiles and slightly bobs her head as she hands over the report. Her psychological message is, "I've done what you asked. Can you help me now?" Given all this, she is likely in a positive adapted child ego state, as she is responding to rules in a way likely to benefit her. In response, her manager gives a warm smile and nods approvingly. Her psychological message is, "You've done what I asked. I'm pleased and will remember this in the future." It is probable that she is in a positive controlling parent ego state, given that she is showing a parental influence with positive regard for Claire. Angular transactions are transactions in which the initiator of the communication addresses one ego state with their social message, but addresses another with their psychological message. The person they are addressing responds not from the ego state addressed by the social message, but from the ego state addressed by the psychological message. They do this with both their social and psychological messages. In effect, the initiator is tricking the responder into responding, without a hidden message, from another ego state, A response from a particular ego state can never be forced, but can be invited, with the responder being baited into the choice the initiator wishes them to make. Given this, such transactions often occur in sales, management, politics, or any other field in which subliminal persuasion is used. On the diagram, the initiator's psychological message is represented, but the responder's is not. To illustrate an angular transaction, Claire is talking to an ambitious young staff member regarding a difficult assignment. She says, "This is going to be really tough. Not everyone could do this, so don't worry about saying no." This appears to be an adult-to-adult transaction, but her tone of voice betrays the fact that Claire is addressing her staff member's child ego state with a hidden message, "I bet you can't do it. Prove me wrong." He responds directly from his positive adapted child ego state to her adult, saying, "No problem. I can do this. I'll get it done. I won't let you down." There is no hidden message here. He means it, and is unaware that Claire has manipulated him into doing exactly what she wants. The previous example illustrates that what people do and say as a result of an ulterior transaction usually results from the hidden message sent out in the stimulus. Given this, we can state the third rule of communication as follows. The behavioural outcome of an ulterior transaction is determined at the psychological and not at the social level. One of the main problems people have in life is being stuck in ways of interacting with others that are harmful but never seem to change. This can be because we become stuck in chains of complementary transactions, transactions that, though painful, are stable and long-lasting due to their settled familiarity, as explained by the first rule of communication. If we want to move away from this stuckness to more desirable interactions, we can initiate a cross-transaction. Then, according to the second rule of communication, either the person we are transacting with will want to move into a more desirable complementary transaction, matching our new ego state, or we will revert to the old undesirable complementary transaction. Since moving back is not what we want, it may be necessary to move to a cross-transaction a number of times before the person we are communicating with accepts our invitation, especially if we are trying to change behaviour patterns that have existed for years or even decades. To give an example of this, we may return to Claire's child-to-parent interaction with her overbearing superior. The recurring chain of similar complementary transactions with him makes her uncomfortable, so in an attempt to change this, she initiates contact from her adult ego state, saying, in a positive, open manner, "Could you take a look at these figures? They show how understaffed we are compared to other departments." Since the superior still responds from his negative controlling parent, "I told you not to bother me like this. You'll just have to make do." This results in a cross-transaction. The cross-transaction is uncomfortable for them both. If Claire persists from her adult ego state, it is more likely that her superior will eventually respond from his own adult ego state saying, "Okay, I'll take a look and see if you're right." This results in a complementary transaction that is much more satisfactory for Claire. The first-order structural model and the second-order functional model are covered in other videos. Please visit our channel for more, and subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new videos are uploaded.